inside the bubble, the real focus, of course, is on the Labor leadership. What taxpayers, what voters, I think, want to know is when are we going to get those tax cuts? I'm joined from Canberra by Sky News political reporter James O'Doherty. And James, one of the good things about the election, I suppose, is that we knew whichever major party won, these first round of tax cuts, the rebates were going to come through later this year, if the laws can be passed by the end of June 30. But Scott Morrison has already said that that time frame might be a bit tight.
Well, that's right. Scott Morrison was emphasising that he was going to try to get Parliament back before June 30 to pass those tax cuts, those rebates. But that is probably not going to happen now. Scott Morrison conceding on Paul Murray Live that it's probably a bit difficult to bring Parliament back because there are a range of other things to consider. First, you need to get the writs back. Then there's the ministry to consider as well. So, look, Scott Morrison saying that it will be difficult for him to bring Parliament back before June 30, but the tax cuts will still be able to flow to voters administratively. The ATO can administratively, retrospectively, issue these tax cuts through additional rebates after the end of the financial year and the beginning of the next financial year. That's if they do pass Parliament when it's returned, even if that is after July. So that will happen. There might be some delay because if Parliament doesn't get back before June 30, then the ATO will need to go back and do it afterwards. That has led Chris Bowen to say that this is already a broken promise from the government.
He's now said that the Parliament won't come back and they won't pass the tax cuts, so they might need to wait a year. He said back then, it doesn't matter, Parliament doesn't need to sit, we can just do it administratively. I pointed out that it was wrong. And the ATO pointed out it was wrong, and the government just denied it. Well, he wasn't telling the truth. Now, that, I think, says a lot about this government. Here we are, a couple of days in, and they're already breaking promises.
I suppose it's going to be the first test of whether they've listened. We've had a number of Labor figures say that their policies were too left-wing, too divisive, that they were hitting middle-income earners. I've heard a number of Labor figures saying that in the analysis, and so I suppose the test for whoever is the new leader of the Labor Party is to say, well, will they respond? Will they actually acknowledge that you do have to listen to the aspirations of Australians, that dividing Australians and calling people working hard, earning a middle income, the top end of town?
Yeah, well, James, Chris Bowen's at least got half a point here. Maybe calling it a broken promise is a bit of a stretch, but there's no doubt that Scott Morrison was warned about the timing of the election and how it could jeopardise getting Parliament back in time. He said don't worry about it, so he better make sure that either he gets Parliament back there very quickly or he does deal with it in this administrative fashion, as you've said. But also Chris Bowen today, of course, throwing his hand up for the Labor leadership. Important, really, this, because so far we'd only had two left faction people talked about, Anthony Albanese and Tanya Plibersek, and so Chris Bowen becomes the first person on the right of the Labor Party to throw their hat into the ring.
At least formally, Chris. We've had a couple of other people from the right talking about potentially running, but Chris Bowen, the first contender to challenge Anthony Albanese for this position, the first confirmed contender apart from Anthony Albanese. Chris Bowen announcing he will be a candidate for the Labor leadership this morning. And his pitch, central to his pitch, is the fact that he can lead the economic narrative. Now, this, of course, despite the fact that he was the author, one of the authors of the franking credit dividends policy, which turned out to be not particularly popular with the electorate.
Franking credits was a controversial policy for which, no doubt, we lost some votes. But I don't accept it's why we lost the election in entirety. We also lost the election because of policies we don't have, like a death tax. I had more people raising the death tax on the polling booths with me than ever raised franking credits.
And on this issue of franking credits, we're already seeing some policy difference between Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen, with Anthony Albanese suggesting this morning that the policy could have been better targeted.
I think one of the options that could have been considered is putting a cap on it, and that would have ensured that the people who were not getting huge amounts of money.
You'd stop hurting that. You'd stop the collateral damage for average people, surely. I mean, that was the whole argument.
Well, you could have done that, and you could have done a combination of that and grandfathering as well.
Yeah.
So what we do know is that this leadership of the Labor Party will now be a contested ballot, so it will go to the caucus and to the rank and file as well. But I can expect, Chris, that we will see potentially some more challenges before this is all through.
Yeah, James, it's always looked like to me when Tanya Plibersek pulled out that this might have been a play to see a right-of-centre leader, then she could stay on as deputy. Of course, if Albo were to win, you couldn't have two left-faction MPs from neighbouring electorates in the heart of Sydney in the leadership and the deputy leadership. So I wouldn't rule out Tanya Plibersek bobbing up as the deputy again in the future. James, now that we know there's going to be a contest and the full ALP membership around the country will get a vote, what sort of time frame are we talking about before all this is settled?
Well, it usually runs for about a month, Chris, whilst the rank and file put their votes in. There's a number of policy debates, usually. This has only happened once before, bear in mind, when Anthony Albanese ran against Bill Shorten after the last time they lost the election in 2013. So, look, it's only happened once before, but the time frame is about a month, that they would need to do it fairly quickly to get a leader back in, potentially before Parliament sits again. But there are a number of rules regarding how this process runs in terms of how long party members have to return their ballots. So it is a process that does take a couple of weeks. The Labor Party argues that this is a democratic process within the party, but it is not something that is going to be done particularly immediately. So there'll still be a couple of more weeks of this to come, Chris.